Okay.
Holla ballers, what's going on? It's Preacher, and oh
here it is.
God! Blizzard is communicating with us, my friends. They are communicating with us, and we have an official response from Josh, aka Law, regarding Azerite Armor, which has been a hot button topic on my channel now since the first moment of BFA Alpha. And yeah,
he doesn't like
it. Negativity going around. And I know you guys are getting tired of it. Believe me, me too. Me too. I want something glorious to share with you. And this morning when we started the stream, I checked the sheer amount of people before we'd even clicked start streaming who were in the chat waiting for me to start and were like, dude, you have to see this. And also I then checked my Twitter feed after and you'd spammed me with it. And okay.
I got spammed with it too.
It's rather lengthy. I am going to read it because each paragraph here, it sums about 7 or 8 paragraphs. Each paragraph actually contains something worthy of comment.
For a blue post.
And some sort of feedback. So if you have already read it, I'll put a timestamp down below where we actually give that comment and that feedback regarding this post. Okay, so for context for the post, people were once again made a very concise post. I'm going to bring up his name because he actually did a really good job.
What's his name?
I didn't agree with absolutely everything in the op, but it was Chaos Bug from the Divine Vigilance Guild.
Good job,
Chaos Bug. He made a rather concise post with all the issues that he has with Azerite Armor, and he made one of the best comparisons I can make regarding Azerite Armor and how it's acquired that I've ever seen. It was so fucking brilliant that I can't wait to share it with you after this.
That's his music in the... that's his. Like, he has that 1995 elevator music techno song. It's not me. Guys, relax. It's chill. Guys, just chill.
So all the issues we've had with Azerite Armor, here we go. We got an official blue response from our community manager. Let's see what he had to say.
It's from Lore.
First off, thank you for putting this thread together. Even if phrases like worst itemization in WoW's history are a bit hyperbolic, parentheses, seriously, I can't be the only one who remembers farming level 30 dungeons for AQ40 resistance gear, close parentheses. You've summarized a lot of the discussions we've been seeing around the community very well. It really helps us clarify exactly what we need to be focusing on. I'll speak to each of your points as best I can. Regarding targeting specific traits, I think we've said this a few times now, but just to reiterate, we believe that's merely a symptom of the imbalance between traits. Ideally, the gap between them isn't so large that you feel it would be hugely beneficial.
And this is what the community manager is saying.
Perfect set. The point about traits being useless and uninteresting is interesting, considering that you also make the point of every gear change requires simming.
So he's trying to prove the poster wrong.
These 2 points are kind of at odds with each other.
They're not.
The way to solve the simming issue would be to make the traits more simplistic in nature. Similarly, making traits with more outside-the-box designs leads to more complicated questions of, is this better or not? Which in turn encourages more simming. Either way, it's an interesting challenge, and we're taking to mind as we move forward with traits in future updates. I think we agree that refarming traits doesn't feel great. I don't have a solve for that issue to share today. And to be completely transparent, it may be something we simply have to accept as a downside to the system.
We have to accept it. You made it.
We agree it can be a bit of a downer.
It's like God accepting original sin.
I mentioned the imbalance between traits before.
What do you mean?
But just to expand on that, that's why we focus so much effort into tuning the Azerite traits over the past few weeks. With this most recent round of tuning, we think we've gotten the most out of the really egregious outliers dialed in, but please let us know if there are any you still feel are so good that they're worth huge sacrifices in terms of item level. As to the point about reforging costs, these costs get so high because we want the behavior we're describing.
Oh!
Reforging constantly depending on what you're doing to be unsustainable.
That sounds awesome.
Our intention is that you either build out multiple sets of gear for different situations, or you lean towards traits that work in a variety of roles, even if they're maybe not the best for each scenario.
That seems like it's terrible.
We added the reforging system to help ease cases like, for example, a DPS who suddenly finds themselves needing to transition to being their guild's main tank, not as a means for constantly readjusting traits like a second set of talent points. Maybe the current system isn't achieving that, but if it's not, we're likely to become more, in caps, this was highlighted, more restrictive on reforging, not less. And
Why?
finally, regarding the tuning passes, like I mentioned,
what does that
we
do
think
for
we've
the?
got
Why
most
is that
of the
good?
major outliers dialed into an acceptable level at this point. There's likely to still be some adjustments here and there, but we do not believe we're going to need another big wave of Azerite trait tuning like you've seen over the last few weeks. To put it another way, if one trait is far and away the best compared to every other option, sure, we should probably do something about that. But we don't expect that to take the form of a widespread tuning pass going forward.
Okay.
Also, to Ian's comment about the new traits being introduced, he was referring to new traits on new gear added in new content with higher item level. That replaces your old gear entirely.
So what about
We're
Mythic
not
Plus?
planning to add in new traits to existing items, so don't worry about holding on to old Azerite pieces just in case their traits change.
Oh no, that would never
That's the
happen.
end of the post. Now, there's
That
a
would never
huge
happen.
amount to digest here. This is a lot to digest. And I'm sure some of you are either... I imagine some of you are probably okay with what you just heard, but I imagine some of you are just going, what?
The only people who are okay
Because
with
there's
it are
some
the ones that
very
weren't
dark things in
listening.
here. And this conversation between the community and the developers regarding this gearing system has almost taken a rather bitter turn now.
Yes.
They actually see... This felt very defensive to me.
Well,
It
they
came
are.
across as very defensive, and I think the message overall, where before we get into too much detail here, is at this point we would kind of just like you to shut the fuck up about it and get on with it, because
Just
we can't do
accept
anything
it.
about it, and it feels like that's the situation.
They can't do anything about
There are
their
some
own
things
game.
that you're probably saying, wait a minute,
They
isn't
can't do
that
anything.
wrong? And we are going to get to that in a moment.
It's
But
out
it
of their
definitely
control.
feels at this point like rings 1 and 2 of the Azerite system are basically just write-offs. So let's start at the beginning, and I'll kind of guide through how I arrived at this situation after over an hour of discussion this morning. Let me clear my throat, 'cause there's a lot to talk about here. Okay, let's talk about the opening paragraph where the Azerite system was compared, because obviously in the original post, he said this is the worst itemization we've ever had in WoW's history. And in that regard, he's talking to a huge amount of traits that are not clear on if they're good or not, and they're
That's true.
constantly being changed and switched around, and frankly, we don't know if we've got them or not, right? So all these issues is you're asking
That's
us
very
to
true.
chase these carrots, which, for one, when I get the carrot, I'm not sure if I've got a carrot. I can't tell in any way, shape, or form whether I have it or not, unless I break down my damage or whatever.
Well, you might have
into
a carrot
different-
one week,
into
and
a
then
different
Blizzard hot
third-party
fixes it to a
source.
piece of
I
shit.
can't read what's on this carrot to figure out if the carrot I'm
course
chasing
not.
is any
It'll be
good.
complicated for players.
And I'm also having to put a lot of effort into this, and I'm also having the access to the carrot restricted because Azerite Armor acquisition past item level 340 is hugely, hugely gated.
No
And
carrots.
down entirely to RNG.
Right.
A massive amount
Need to
of
have
RNG.
multiple sets.
And therefore, this is
Keep
the
that in
worst
mind.
system ever. 1, it's hard for me to get.
Yes.
2, I don't know if it's good when I get it.
Yep.
And 3, I kind of have to farm an ulterior source to make it work. So I'm not happy with this system
And 4, it gets
whatsoever.
changed constantly.
The comparison to farming Moradon in vanilla 13 years ago for AQ40 resistance gear, I actually, again, I think this is trying to... I don't think this landed with anybody as a reasonable comparison.
Because it was
Comparing
stupid.
the Azerite system, which is the foundation of an expansion, to a very niche case of Encourage 40-man raiders, which were very, very far apart from the vast majority of the player base, having to do a level 30 farmable dungeon, which you could do in a few minutes, because I did this. I was there. No, you're not the only one who remembers. I was there. You could do it in a few minutes. It wasn't exactly a...
This is completely right. Like, I just want to pause this and just point out how wrong this is. So what he's talking about is the first boss of Moradon, and one of the wings that you were able to kill, he gave you a trinket that removed poisons, and it also gave you nature resistance. That mob was like level 39 or something like that. People would go in there and they would farm it. The idea of farming a mob that has a loot table of 5 items with a group of 5 people that you can do it 5 times an hour is the same as rolling a random fucking number generated dice that has like 50,000 fucking sides on it, and then opening up a box and getting another pair of gloves that you don't fucking need instead of the Azerite armor that you need. It's just a completely wrong comparison. And if you want to use, hey, well, we did one thing dumb before, so this other thing dumb that we're doing now isn't even half as dumb than what we've done before, so why are you calling us dumb now whenever we've done things that are way dumber than this? You haven't seen anything yet.
big ask to go into Moradon and farm something that you could come out and just do again.
And I thought nature resist was fine, by the way.
Again, it wasn't a big deal.
Exactly.
Yes, it sucked, and yes, it made no sense that for the 3rd tier Molten Core Blackwing Lair Ahn'Qiraj that we had to go back to a level 30 dungeon in order to acquire items for one specific boss. In this case, it was Princess Hooverang, who did so much nature damage you had to get nature resist gear. And the only nature resist gear in the game outside of Ahn'Qiraj was in Moradon. And I would also point out that it's very, very different for high-level, high-geared raiders to go and farm a level 30 dungeon.
Yeah, it's really hard.
The comparison there is completely spurious. It's just utterly ridiculous, and it really put a bad tone into anybody who did remember that's mouth. I think he did himself no favors comparing that.
He's talking about being a high-end raider. I remember there was one of the Q&As where Josh and Ian were talking, and then they were talking about a mechanic on Ragnaros. And Josh was talking about the normal mode mechanic, and Ian was talking about the heroic mode mechanic, right? Like, Josh was in phase 3, Ian was in phase 4. And this is just another example of Josh being in phase 3.
Was that poor itemization? Yes, but it was also ultra niche. It was also 13 years ago.
I don't hate Josh or anything.
And it also affected a very, very tiny fraction of the player base who happened to be progressing on one of the later bosses of the 3rd out of 4 tiers of vanilla linear raiding. We are talking about very, very, very few people who would go, oh yeah, this was just like this. Whereas the Azerite Armor is affecting literally everybody who plays the game. And seems to be continuously affecting them till the end of the expansion. It's just not a fair comparison. And
the
really
fun never
ends.
ends.
Good idea to bring that up, I don't think. Let's move on to the next point. The next point is really quite depressing because the only thing I could get out of this was, at this point, we would rather you didn't care about Azerite Armor, and we're kind of making it intentional that you shouldn't care. So to remind you that
care about our
going
game.
for specific traits, we think that's a symptom of imbalance. So some traits are just far better than others, which is what we saw in the very early days of BFA. And they have brought most of them in line now, by the way. Ideally, the gap between them isn't so large that you feel it would be hugely beneficial to grind out the perfect set. Obviously, a lot of this is up to interpretation, but I find it hard to find another interpretation out of this that isn't... Hopefully, we've balanced it to the point where you won't care, and that's
it's
what
just
we're
all,
after.
yeah, it's like, what's the point anyway? Like, why do you have different traits if they do the same thing?
A whole host of other questions.
Yeah.
If we're not really supposed to care about this system much, and you've balanced things in such a way that it doesn't really matter what we get, then why is it so prized and precious and being locked off? Also, why have you created a system? What's the purpose in this system if we're not really supposed to care about what
if they don't matter?
This makes no sense. Am I supposed to be more excited about a ring with good stats than Azerite Armor, which is the big gearing selling point of Battle for Azeroth, of your whole expansion? Am I supposed to be more excited about a ring? Because I can tell you, honestly, as it stands, I am. If I see a really nice Titanforge ring with really good stats, I'm pretty happy.
I like that.
Getting Azerite Armor, I'm not that interested at all. So they have achieved that, but the question then remains is, what's the point in the system? You've created a system that you seemingly don't want us to care about that much anymore, and we should just be happy with whatever we get whenever we get it.
Sounds like Blizzard has a lot of confidence.
Like, you have a higher level piece of Azerite.
A lot of confidence
right now,
in the
most exciting benefit of Azerite Armor is being stuck with 340 for quite a while, and then maybe getting a 370 or a 385 from your Mythic Plus chest or your PvP chest or whatever. And that's the exciting part, is that the item level has shot up a lot. And maybe that's kind of the thought process that went into it, is having these rather large jumps in item level might feel quite satisfying to a lot of players. What the armor actually does and what it represents is kind of... it's neither here nor there. You shouldn't really care. That's not what they want you to care about.
Why would you care about the game?
It's rather sad
Doesn't
to
make
hear
any
that
sense.
that seems to be the intention, is that they're not really bothered. As long as you get something, that should be fine, because they're all pretty balanced and the same.
Then why do you have
moving
different
on to the
ones?
next comment then, which was obviously the traits themselves, is people bringing up that you're asking us to chase these carrots, as we talked about, but they're pretty useless and uninteresting.
The carrots don't taste
the
good.
point about traits being useless and uninteresting is interesting, considering that you also make the point of every gear change requires simming. These 2 points are kind of at odds with each other. Well, they're absolutely not. And what bothers me a little bit about this comment is that Lorne definitely knows this. If you don't know where Josh or Lore came from, he came from doing the same thing I'm doing to you right now, is looking into the game mechanics, questioning, commenting, He knows exactly why these 2 points don't make sense. Just because your system of uninteresting traits is so ambiguous as to which ones are good that we're forced to sim it doesn't make them interesting in and of themselves. Just because I can't literally figure out which of these boring things is the best
Which piece of shit is the best?
Because I can't find out by reading it. I can't really find out by doing a test dummy either. I would need to stand there for hours to try and figure out which one's the best. And therefore I have to use a third-party website and program in order to figure out which one's the best of these terrible things.
Of course.
Does not make those terrible things interesting. And that's a very obvious thing.
Which terrible thing do I want today?
With this reply is like, why are you saying these two are odds to each other? Just because I have to go and do some extra work to figure out which one's best, because that's the system you've created, does not inherently make those things interesting at all. Finding out which of these terrible apples won't kill me isn't that interesting. You know what I mean? And it's a very crazy
Well, it's interesting. It's just not fun.
Suggest that those two things are mutually exclusive in some way, or not mutually exclusive. It's very, very bizarre that he would even say that. He then goes on to say, the way to solve the simming issues would be to make the traits more simplistic in nature. And this is said in a way as if that would be a bad thing, because aren't they simple enough, is what I got from this. Like Thunderous Blast and Elemental Whirl.
They're all simple.
Dagger in the Back. They're already like very simple.
They're passive abilities that don't do anything.
We can't make them simpler than that. Well, actually, you can, and you know you can. If all those traits were gone, and let's say as a Frost Mage, for example, one of the traits was makes my Glacial Spike, which is my big heavy-hitting Ice Spike, hits 3 targets instead of 2 with a certain talent. It's very clear to me that that would be the obvious choice to take.
That's the AoE one.
In a 3-target cleave situation.
Yes.
Right? That would make absolute sense to me.
You wouldn't need to look it up.
If you suggest I can have Frozen Orb that stayed still like in PvP, and that was an Azerite trait for PvE, I would understand whether I wanted that or not.
Oh, that would be badass.
It's still a remarkably simple trait. Your Frozen Orb is now stationary, isn't complex or difficult to understand. Your Spike now hits 3 targets, isn't difficult to understand. And that's why...
Well, it would be.
It seems to me that internally at Blizzard, they seemingly are trying to reduce the amount of information they give players by intentionally obscuring and leaving out information. We actually talked about that in the last...
If you want to understand what Blizzard's target audience is, type the emote Poogers in the chat. Think about a person that personifies that, and that's what they're going for.
Video where we can see where they've openly admitted they're doing that, and that's making it simple enough, but in fact it's making the situation considerably worse because there's so much information being left out of what is such an ambiguous ability that we don't know anything about it, and therefore we can't figure out if it's good or not, and therefore we're going to simming. Reducing the amount of words on a tooltip or how simple it seems to be explained. Yes, you can look at, say, Thunderous Blast or whatever, or some of the other ones, and say, well, we told you it just does random nature damage. That's pretty simple.
That's
like,
so
yes,
fun.
But there's 6 things that do random amounts of damage. Like,
how random is it?
That's not helping me in any way. And it's certainly not class-specific in any way. And that makes it considerably more difficult. The idea that simply reducing the amount of words in a tooltip equates to making things simple is not good.
No, it does for people who are really stupid.
Which seems to be the mindset at the moment.
Yes,
it's like we've made them as simple as possible, just get on with it. The obviously very, very dark portion of this was that they agree that having to just refarm the same traits over and over again for the end of the lifetime
Look at this.
is a downer, but fuck, that's the way it's gonna be, and probably is.
Imagine, this is like, as I said, it's like God creating original sin. It's like they don't realize the fact that they have created this system. This is something that they have done. And they're like, well, we can't undo this. What do you mean you can't undo it? You did it. You just change it because you make it. You're God of WoW. You just changed the system. I don't know what else there is to say.
Is the way it's going to be for the remainder of the expansion. Sorry. Is really poor. Like, oh my, that's pretty scary. That's pretty scary, boys. I mean,
you're just gonna have to deal with it.
Transparent. It's something that we have to accept as a downside to the system.
That
there
sounds
was a
like a
wonderful
lot of
reply
fun.
to this post where this part was highlighted, where they just said, "Can you tell us what the upsides of this system are? You could agree there's downsides to the system. Which bit's the good bit? What are you selling us on here?
Oh, that's so good.
Why is this a good system?
Why
in
is
your
this
opinion?"
good?
And I doubt we're going to get that response because the system is now totally.
It's good because we like it
completely at this point. By this point,
I don't know why I really like it.
we've
That's
actually
funny.
already agreed that one, refarming the traits is a downer, and they accept that, and that's the way it's going to be. And on the other side of that, they've also said, and you shouldn't really care about the traits you get. I mean, to say this system is collapsed, I think would be fair. It's an utterly useless system that hopefully is going to keep people
This is what we lost tier sets for.
Clearly not.
We lost tier
Let's move
sets for
forward
this.
again then. You mentioned the imbalance in the traits.
Thank you, Blizzard.
We're putting huge amounts of effort into retuning the traits to make them as balanced. And they have done that.
Well, they
For the
could
most
have done
part,
that
they're
in
pretty
beta.
balanced, to
But,
the point
you know.
where you can just equip it. We did some testing today choosing the absolute worst traits you could possibly pick.
Okay.
And then compared it to choosing the best traits you could possibly pick. It's still a good 10% depending on the class. Like my mage was about 5-10% DPS difference, which is still pretty substantial.
Why?
But it's
Why
far
would they
better
even do
than
that?
having 370 IR.
Why would you create a
385
system where the
Azerite
player can
armor
just
being
make them
unable to
10%,
equip it at all?
make
But
themselves
there's
10%
still a
shittier?
reasonable difference there. But that's going
If
from
you're
the
trying to
absolute
streamline, what's the
max
point?
best you could get by doing steady research and choosing
I don't
the
get it.
intentionally worst across all three pieces. But it is about 10% still, if you're interested in that. Okay. This bit was a little contradictory, I would think. The point about reforging. So obviously the issue was I have to keep swapping my Azerite armor traits depending on what I want to do. And then their reply is, actually, that's not what we want you to do. We don't even really want you ever doing that.
Listen to this.
And if we find people are swapping Azerite traits a lot, we're probably going to become more and more restrictive on reforging. They want you to be building multiple sets. The obvious question here...
This is how stupid this is. Mitch Jones had to DM me on Twitter because he needed to borrow 100K to reforge his Azerite armor because he ran out of money. And Blizzard's solution to that is they want Mitch to pay even more.
Then why have you heavily restricted us being able to build multiple sets? On the one hand, you're saying to us, hey, here's Azerite armor, and we give you the ability to change the traits if you want.
Yeah, guys, everybody send...
And we want you to build multiple sets of this.
Send Gay Mitch on Kel'Thuzad some gold. He needs it to respec his Azerite armor. Gay Mitch on Kel'Thuzad. That's his character name.
And in the other hand, they're saying, but we're going to make it incredibly difficult and completely down to a roll of the dice as to being able to build those multiple sets. These two systems do not compute. 1 and 1 does not equal 2 here. And that's a big problem. I mean, let's look at it from both sides. Right now, the problem is you might start to be picking up 370, 385 Azerite armor from your chests, but you've only got a head, a shoulders, maybe 2 pieces if you're raiding. Maybe you got lucky and got 3 pieces. And for your raid roll, okay, you're good. But in your other rolls, you don't really do that thing. So if you're a shaman, for example, perhaps you're an enhancement in a raid, and don't meme me on this, I'm just using this as an example. But when you go into PvP, you're a healer, and when you do Mythic Plus, you tend to be elemental, because that's the best for your setup and stuff. It's completely at odds with why we got rid of the artifact weapons. We got rid of the artifact weapons because it was very frustrating for people who played multiple roles of their spec and enjoyed the game more because of that. I want to be clear on this. People who enjoyed the game a lot more. If they wanted to do multiple roles because that's how they played the game, they were punished because they
more
would have
diversity
to,
of content.
farm triple the amount of AP as everybody else in order to get each weapon up. So the Heart of Azeroth solves that issue. Now we've got the other example where Azerite armor is being heavily restricted, one in acquisition. So
that's
it's very
really
difficult
good
to acquire good pieces in the first place. And also that Blizzard is actively pushing the stance that we don't want you using this armor in multiple scenarios. We want you to build multiple sets.
Multiple randomly
so
generated
should
RNG
realistically
sets.
people be expecting to get, because the RNG system is considerably poor.
Carry around
let's
5
suppose
helmets
in the
for every
Shaman
occasion.
Example, my man needs an enhancement set for raiding. He also needs an enhancement set for doing other things like dungeons.
Mythic
where the traits
Plus.
are slightly different, but he also
PvP.
heals in PvP, so he needs a
Ooh,
PvP
3.
heal set, and maybe he needs an elemental set.
4
that
helmets
goes with that just in case, or maybe he needs to go and he wants to enjoy his class. I mean,
5
I don't think
helmets.
I need to come up with far more examples other than I want to play some
That's a lot of
elementals
hats.
for a bit, or maybe this is better this week depending on the affixes, things like that. There are lots of reasons for it. We're now at like 5 sets. Where does it go from there? What if there are different sets for AoE and single target, as many specs have? Okay,
6
now we're at
sets.
6 sets. What about if I want to expand that into elemental? I've got 7 sets.
7
So now
hats.
you very quickly start seeing.
I
the
feel like I'm
picture
playing
here, and
Team
it's worse for
Fortress.
classes like druids, of course, where you're having to acquire so many sets of armor, right? That it becomes crazy to think about one having all those sets of armor, because you're multiplying that then by 3 for the head, shoulders, and the chest. And then in the same breath, you're restricting access to these pieces. If we're being conservative, we could say 5 sets. That's 15 pieces of armor. That's all down to a weekly box and some raid luck, and that's it. And you want me to collect maybe 15 pieces of armor, depending on what's going on? That
How
seems really
good.
unfair, you know? That seems
It
really
sure
unfair
is.
if I just want to enjoy my class. And that's
Yeah.
merely the problem here, enjoying my class. And it doesn't seem to make any sense. And it also seems very, very at
You're not
odds
allowed to
with
have
the whole
fun anymore.
purpose of changing over to the Heart of Azeroth in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
This 1-on-1 doesn't make 2 is becoming more and more apparent. It's like, well, we intended it to work this way, but at the same time, we made it very hard to actually do what we intended you to do. But if you start doing it the other way, which would be to reforge your Azerite armor regularly, then we're going to stop you doing that. But are you going to do anything to increase the acquisition of Azerite
That's
armor
the
so we're not
grand
put in
scheme.
this position? That would be fine. Or should I expect, as is happening on my druid right now, because on my druid, I'm balancing raids, I heal or tank dungeons. So I have 2 pieces of 370 Azerite armor, which is a substantial increase. You know, he's 60 item levels between the two. It's a substantial increase when I'm doing 10, 11, and 12 keys. So if I need to heal a 12 key, you're goddamn right. I want that 370 Azerite armor there.
Yeah.
And I have no other way of acquiring it, Blizz. You've literally prevented me doing it. So
Yeah, you
am I
have to do
supposed
it.
to suck it up and stay as balance? Or what's the idea here? And yes, that does mean I need to reforge a lot more than Blizzard seemingly wants
Look at
me
this.
to
Look
do.
what they're doing on screen.
And maybe they're going to try and hamstring
He
me
just
on
skipped all
doing
those
that.
mobs.
Very crazy.
I had no idea you could do that.
He does mention there are going to be no more major tuning passes, which is kind of good news because
Damn.
we were at the point where we were playing
That's
Azerite
crazy.
Lottery, holding on to all our pieces because next week it's whatever Blizzard spins the wheel on to say that's
You
now
really
the best
think they're
piece,
not going to do another
which
change?
is never nice to be going forward.
Give me a
the
fucking
final
break.
point raised then was to
Of course
Ian's
they will.
comment on the AMA that he did last week, where Law clarifies to Ian's comment about new traits being introduced. He was referring to new traits on new gear added in new content with higher item level that replaces your old gear entirely. We are
That
not
seems
planning
terrible.
to add in new traits to existing items, so don't worry about holding on to Azerite pieces just in case their traits change. Now,
Okay.
this is a difficult one because I think the statement that Ian made during that AMA was actually pretty clear and it is not in line with what Law says in this post. So I have found it again and I will read it to you and you guys can make your own sense because we tried, at least with the few thousand of us in the stream today, to try and figure out some ambiguity in order to see whether or not you could come up with it a different way or you can think about a different way. And here we go. This was from the AMA with Ian Hazacostas, the game director.
Okay.
While the generic traits are deliberately fairly straightforward, some of the spec-specific ones are indeed too passive, interact awkwardly with spec rotations. We'll be retiring some of those in an upcoming patch and adding better replacements to the pool. And of course, we'll be adding all new Azerite traits in new tiers of gear and upcoming content as the expansion continues. Okay, so the ambiguity here is some people felt that by retiring...
But
that
they
doesn't
just
mean
said
they're
they weren't going to do
take
that.
away the boring passive traits now. It's just that they won't appear on new gear when the new stuff comes. That can be interpreted somewhat that way if you think about it that way. However, it doesn't come across to me that way. But again, we're kind of arguing semantics here that whatever the latest point is, which is what Laura's posted now, is going to be the way. But I did want to pass some comment onto this. The reason I think that is this because we'll be retiting some of those in an upcoming patch and adding better replacements to the pool. That comment is made entirely separately from the next comment, which was, and of course, we'll be adding all new Azerite traits on new tiers of gear. That's talk from an upcoming content as the expansion continues. So that means the higher rank level stuff that's coming with new content will have all new Azerite traits. But the statement before it is, we are going to retire some of the current ones in a patch. We're just going to patch out some of them and bring in some other ones. Which got us a little excited. It's like, okay, they've listened. They realize these traits are, mind-numbingly dull in some cases. And they're going to do something about it. The most recent statement from Law does suggest, clearly says that's not what's going to happen. That's not what's going to happen. The likelihood is, in my opinion, from what I can read into this, is they looked into it and maybe came up with some traits. But at this point, the solution might be better, as I said at the start of the video, is simply to let Rings 1 and 2 die. And just let them be a waste of time. And then whatever Ring 3 is, or whatever, that be the interesting one. Or they will go away.
Those are
with
the
what
passives.
Some people took away from Ian's comment, which was that
if those are boring, then
here's the issue. You see,
what?
When the new set of tier of gear comes and our item level accessibility goes up, that the Azerite Armor you would get from there, from your Mythic Plus box, will in fact contain different traits to what came from the Mythic Dungeon, because the old boring traits no longer exist. Now that does fly in the face of what Blizzard originally said, where you would know that the gear from Azerite or whatever is the traits you're looking for and get. That would create a difference there.
I don't think they know what they're doing.
They very desperately don't want to do. I think more realistically,
from
what I could tell here is Ian meant what he said at the time, which is, yeah, some of them are garbage. We're going to take them out and put some good ones in.
I like that.
Then they looked into it and thought, what's the point? This is not a good idea right now because we've just got... It's actually far easier to just rebalance 1 and 2 to kind of be negligible. And then when we can introduce a new ring of stuff as we go forward into new tiers... Then we can add in
just
irrelevant. It's actually better to do that than to take out some other ones, put some new ones in, and then try and rebalance those along with the already existing traits, which kind of makes sense. I just don't like. I mean, you guys can pass comment on this as well. I think it's pretty clear what Ian was saying in that AMA is that, yeah, we're retiring some, we're getting rid of them, and we're going to replace them. I mean, those are the words he said. We're retiring and replacing in a patch. Not that we've got just new ones coming on.
But don't save them because we won't replace them.
He mentions that separately going forward. I think this is just more a case of, no, shouldn't have said that. We've actually looked into it. It's not a good idea. I would rather, Laura's, if that was the case, and it might not be, it might just be interpreted as some people said, which is that he just misspoke.
That's okay,
which
too.
Which is entirely possible.
Yeah, I mean, everybody makes mistakes.
And this is the main issue, because obviously we have to take Law's word, which is the most recent one, which actually discusses the point I've just raised, as the most up-to-date one, is, look, this hasn't worked, right? Look, we get it. It's not worked, but obviously they're not going to say that. Rather than try to rewrite
I don't know why they don't just say that. People would like that.
On par with...
You'll be okay with that.
With rewriting the past to modify it.
Be fine.
I think that was a better way.
Like, yeah, we fucked up.
Better way. And the issue with comments like this is it's very easy to be called out as a liar, because there are many, many people who read what was said in the AMA as I did, which is you're retiring and replacing some of these more passive traits, which is what he said. And then seeing, like, actually, no, he didn't say that. It's like, well, I can read that. There's a lot of players who are going to go, wait a minute, you just said you were going to sort this out. Now you're saying that's not what he said, but I can read it over here. And it creates this frustration and doubt into what's happening here. Either way, that's what's happening, and that's my comments on it. I know it's a hot topic at the moment. Many of you have asked me to pass comment on it. I will link the thread down below. I'll link both the AMA, so you can check that as well. And you guys can see what you think. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.
For a longer video, I actually thought that was pretty good. We'll give him a like. That was definitely a good video. I liked it a lot. It made a lot of sense. So what he was saying was completely relevant, right? I mean, like, obviously everything he was saying made a ton of sense. And I agree. Like, whenever I read it, that was the first thing that I thought of. It's like, how are you going to compare like AQ40 to something else? Like, it just seemed a little bit ridiculous to me. All right, past the point. It's just distrust at this point. I don't really know about that.